Hello, everyone. Welcome to the 53rd episode of the Spiritual Brainstorm. In this episode, I intend to dig deeper into the higher perspective of what we're experiencing right now with the coronavirus and the latest developments, and also this idea of alignment and being in tune with your higher self. So, let's dig right in. So, first of all, the higher perspective. What I'd like to focus on today is not the symbolic representation or this whole on idea that basically the inside and the outside are related and we are living what is equivalent to our birth, but focus maybe on the shift between meaning and different models and beliefs for representing reality. Because it's also a very interesting way to look at things. Let me just take you through this idea a little bit back in the past, in the 1500s, around that time, and the religious inquisitions. That was a time where basically we were burning witches, we were also killing people that were not faithful to religion. We nearly killed people that were like Galileo, that questioned the authority of the church. And the priests were, at that time, were the ones that held, priests, that held the truth, the legitimacy of saying what is truth and what isn't truth. Fast forward to today, and you can see that we're at the same kind of period. But so you can see that basically this created the disgust towards these monotheist religions and created the right environment for being open to another kind of truth. That was science and empiricism, which ultimately, more than this idea that basically the old vision of the world was false, now we had a higher truth that is true in the absolute. It was more this idea of expanding meaning. So if you imagine meaning, if you imagine the world as being infinite, then inside of it you can create pockets of meaning that are wider and wider and encompass wider and wider specters of the reality, which is infinite. Now you see, in here, you for instance, had tribalism and superstition, which was extremely chaotic and basically depended on the priest, the shaman. Whatever they said was the truth, and it wasn't codified. It was very chaotic. And then monotheist religions came along, or religions of the book, which codified everything. Of course, I'm simplifying because there are many more layers here, but let's just simplify it. So monotheist religions, which said, well, we recognize tribalism, but it was actually, so the idea of the gods and everything, that's all true. But there is a higher truth, which is there is one God that is the God of all of them. And so tribalism is actually within the monotheist reality and religion. And then science comes along, and empiricism, and it says, well, actually, we can explain monotheism through science. We can say that this is just a psychological tool to reassure the human mind of its fear of death. And of course, all of the mystical experiences are just hallucinations of the brain, because we know how the brain functions, and it's just a bunch of chemical reactions that create this illusion of having that experience. So monotheism is somehow encompassed within science, in the scientific discourse, because it explains how the idea of God could come along and could be born. And it explains how people can have the illusion of thinking that what these mystical experiences that they've gone through are false. And now you see that spirituality, or the current revival of spirituality, does not contradict science. It says that science is a part of it, that materialist science and empiricism is all very true, but that there is a higher truth that encompasses science. It doesn't negate science. It doesn't say that it's false. It just says it's part of a higher reality. And so ultimately, what we have is, instead of having this vision of a objective reality that's out there, objective reality, and that we basically discover or uncover, as empiricism or science would make you believe, because that is ultimately what keeps you inside this bubble. It's more that there is an infinite reality, an infinite objective reality, which is really hard to grasp as as it is, that is, as infinity. But then you can create bubbles of meaning inside of it that expand in order to see the infinite nature of reality in more and more and more complex ways. Because once you've integrated these layers, then once you fully experienced them and experimented with them, then your mind and your consciousness is ready to experience the next step. That is, we definitely needed the rationality brought about by science and rationalization in order to handle moving past it towards spirituality. Because if we jump from monotheism, where you have this absolute truth, and the way that it has been used to manipulate people, straight to spirituality, it is no, I mean, I really would hate to see how he would have abused and used spirituality and the knowledge that is that we would acquire a pool from infinity. And so, more than discovering the truth, what we are actually doing is expanding meaning. So, finding more and more sophisticated meaning. So, taking, for example, lightning, the phenomenon of lightning. In tribalism, it was the gods being angry, and it could mean any number of things. It could mean that the gods are happy, angry, depending on what the shaman said. So it was very off-putting and unsettling. Under monotheism, it was just one thing, one phenomenon. One god is angry, not all the gods, not some gods. And, it just had this one absolute meaning. Then under science, you sort of rationalize it, and you say, well, it's just a bunch of particles and electrons, and a difference between potential, electric potential, where it's negative or whatever, positive and negative. And you sort of explain it with cause and effect and science. And then in spirituality, you say, well, it's electrons and stuff, but there's also a transmission of information through lightning on top of this kind of billiard ball effect. And if you Google, for instance, electric universe, they have a very interesting model, which I don't say is true, but it has some interesting insight. It basically says that galaxies, and this is proven now, that galaxies are actually linked to each other via bridges, electric bridges that allow for energy to circulate. And there's this idea, as above, so below, the saying, that if you examine, and there's a paper published on this, by the way, if you examine the links between galaxies, as far as these links, it mirrors the connections between neurons in a brain. And I've been saying for a while now that the universe is basically like a giant mind. And so when you have lightning, it's actually information that is circulated through the universe, that is being that sort of descends from the universe and then goes into Gaia. And that information includes, things like, um, our future potentials, and what are the ideas that should emerge at a certain period of time, that are then going to be processed and digested by people and manifested gradually. So it's you don't leave science, it's still electrons and stuff, but now they carry deeper information that is useful for the universe, not just these stupid billiard balls that hit each other, and there's a sort of a bandwagon effect to that. And so in the 2000s, now what we're living is scientific inquisition. And instead of burning witches, now we're grilling people on TV. So you interview them to death, basically, by ridiculing them and completely discrediting them. We've already talked about conspiracy theories in the last video, so I encourage you to watch that if you didn't see it. And so you're as good as dead. You're socially dead, because you're discredited and humiliated and mocked by the priests of the day today, which are scientists. And there's also another similarity, for instance. During the Inquisition, the priests were calling upon, warning about apocalypse, saying that if you don't obey the priests, God's wrath is going to fall upon you, and it's going to be the end of the world, and you should all repent and follow our teachings, and obey, and flog yourself, and do all kinds of stuff. Today's scientists and priests, of course, are saying it's going to be the end of the world as well, via climate change. And they have plenty of data to back it up. Here, the scriptures were backing it up. And they say that it's going to be tsunamis and all kinds of other climate-related disasters. And of course, all of that is kind of a reality. But it is a reality within a certain bubble of meaning, and that you don't necessarily need to experience. Just like the apocalypse under monotheism, you could subjectively feel like it's the end of the world, but nothing actually happens. Why? Because humanity shifts to the next layer, and thereby it doesn't manifest these disasters that were, nearly upon it. And so when I was talking about birth, or moving from the womb outside to the outside world, you're avoiding a kind of a disaster. You're avoiding an end of the world. You're basically avoiding abortion or stillbirth. That is, you avoid the fact of suffocating in the womb as a fetus. And by the same token, if we shift our bubble of meaning further than materialist science, then suddenly, it unlocks the potential for free energy, which is basically, just oxygen, and the lungs, in the case of the fetus, which starts to breathe only once it's outside, cannot do that once it's inside. But you get the picture, basically. So very similar, end of the world, and obey, of course. Obey, because we have the solutions. You have to take rationing, basically. It's rationing. 2-minute showers. You can only consume this much energy. You have to do this, this, and that. Stop consuming. Stop doing this. Stop doing that. And if you don't obey, then punishment. Being flogged, being fined. You're being punished for misbehaving. And don't get me wrong, the idea is not to stick to mindless consumerism, but it is to start align with our higher selves and understand how all of this works. Until you're in the womb, basically before birth, you are growing exponentially. Once outside the womb during birth, then the weight stabilizes of the baby. If you look at the evolution of the weight of the baby after it's outside the womb for the first 2 years, it's this kind of curve. So it's the inverse of this exponential growth, which is constant. And now also, this, instead of this mindless consumerism where everybody has to have the latest car, everybody has to have the latest TV, everybody has to have everything. Now it all depends on the needs. But what needs? Where do you get your information? Well, in the case of a global organism like a baby, for instance, if we take the view that we are just one cell in a global organism, then the amount of energy that you should consume at any point in time is not linked to your petty little ambitions or whatever, or what you think are your desires, but what the body is doing, the global organism is doing. So, for instance, when the baby is crawling around, it needs to send more energy to its cells in order for them to be able to do the heavy lifting of moving around. When the baby is lying down and resting, then the energy levels go diminish, basically. So, and this is really, really difficult to understand, is that the right amount of energy or the right amount of resources or the right amount of the time in the shower that you need, or whatever the amount of water you should consume, is not linked to any absolute or universal criteria like 2 minutes each, but based on the right amount at the right time at the right time. So it's very much this idea of the living in the present moment, and whatever is right in the present moment is what you should have access to. And this makes perfect sense. If a cell, for instance, in your body, in your legs, received too little oxygen while you were running, or too little resources or energy, you would fall over and maybe your legs would atrophy, your muscles would start to linger away. You wouldn't be even able to walk at a certain point. If they consume too much energy, we actually call that cancer. But so now you're saying, okay, now if you have a scientific mind or a rational mind, you'd be like, well, that's, first of all, that's totally crazy, because how do you know you are in your if your desires are correctly placed and calculated? And that gets us into the last part of the video, which is where it kind of hurts. Is we're living this moment of spiritual awakening, with these scientists basically pushing humanity to its breaking point in terms of trying to control us and manipulate us and punishing us and saying you should be doing this, that, curfew after 10 o'clock, masks everywhere, and if you don't, these are the fines and everything. And and the thing is, in the last video, I was saying that basically we need to be aligned with our highest purpose. But what really hurts is that it has nothing to do with spiritual development. It's not related. That is, you could be someone that is completely oblivious to spirituality. Like you could be a gardener, for instance, tending towards gardens. And if actually that is what is right for you to be doing at that point in time. Doesn't matter if you are still a monotheist or a materialist, because ultimately it's what matters is not what you believe, but what you're doing as a cell. Now, you could be the most awoke person, woke person in terms of spirituality, understand all that I'm saying here, like me, like right now on an intellectual level, and be completely off of your tracks. Like not right, but inadequate or something. Why? Well, personally, I feel that way because I'm explaining all of this to you, and yet, I don't feel, um, I don't feel well. I don't feel like I'm actually on the right track. I feel kind of depressed or stressed and beat and like downtrodden. And if I were on the right doing if I were doing the right thing at the right time, I wouldn't have that kind of feeling. Just like your cells don't have that kind of feeling when they're fulfilling their purpose and receiving what they need. They feel great for doing that because they're aligned. All of their being is aligned. And so maybe for me, the right thing to do is, I don't know, maybe compose music, or maybe take care of my kids, or I don't even know, you see? And that's the thing. Sometimes when you are um, awake in that way, then you tend to overthink things. Um, like I would spend, for instance, days and months, like you're at a crossroad and you have plenty of streets going in all directions, and you're here. And when you're a materialist, or when you don't have all these questions about who are you, what are you supposed to do, what are the things that you have to heal, blah blah blah, then the path that you take can be quite intuitive, and you just go for it. You just act. And so if you're a gardener and you feel like, okay, that's what I have to do, you do it. And you don't start saying, like, oh, but wait a minute, maybe I need to go to the priest to say if I have the approval of God to whatever. Whereas sometimes when you're in this spiritual realm, you just stay there and start meditating on each of these things and overthinking everything. That's my case, by the way. And you end up doing nothing, posting videos online. Maybe that's great. I mean, of course, I'm not saying that it's not helpful for anyone. I have good feedback, of course, on my videos, but still, um, I tend to be paralyzed with by this awakening instead of empowered. And that means that it has nothing to do with your level of development. It has to do with something that is beyond us and beyond rationality. It is connecting to that higher intuition. And so if you have, let's say that we have like three main stages for the development of humans. Right here, you're basically leaving the animal stage, which is very much connected to intuition, but a sort of a base intuition, which doesn't mean that it's bad. It's just that is the best intuition that biology came up with for survival of the species. So it's about knowing when to fight or flight, protecting the integrity of your body, making sure that you have food intake, and all these things, ensuring your survival, basically survival with all the best strategies that biology could come up with. Best, of course, which from a rational human perspective, this is the rational stage, and this is the pre-rational, or even pre-rational. And so you're connected to your gut feeling and animal instincts, and that ensures your survival. Now, at the rational stage, you're kind of in between. You have roots down here that are still connected to your animal instincts, and you have leaves and branches that try to see, what's up there, and you started questioning things. You have this critical thinking mind, and you start developing complex thinking and concepts like philosophy, ethics, morals, all things that are totally disconnected from animals, of course. And so here you're like a thinking chimp. Not quite animal, not quite human. And the idea is, once you grow your roots all the way down here, and once your leaves reach all the way up here, then you can actually say that you've reached a human stage. And human is, to me, it's like embodied in Christ, um, or Christ-like. Even like you could say Buddha is the same, and all of the other ascended masters, as they call them. It is, you're still connected to your animal instincts, but now it's only for survival, real physical survival. So protecting the integrity of your body. And so you no longer start having an ego trip because somebody contradicted you, because you understand that your physical integrity is not in danger. However, if a bus rushes towards you, you're not saying, oh, this whole world is an illusion and I don't care about my body and I'm going to ascend and this and that. You jump out of the way, of course. But your intuition now, you've left the rational. This is like I think the technical term is a transrational. You are fully connected to the intuition from and in tune from what we call the higher self, I guess, which is just basically following the commands of the global organism and its needs. So, like the cells of the baby, when the baby wants to crawl towards the toy, the cells don't say, well, we don't feel like going to the toy. I mean, we want to do our own thing. And no, they align with that impulse or message, and they follow it through. Now, you may say, like physically to us, we explain that as, well, of course, I mean, the brain sends a signal through the nervous system, blah, 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 blah. But from the cell's perspective, it might just be the same kind of experience as intuition, because the nerves only command so many things. You cannot explain everything with just the nervous system. And all the things that have to actually happen simultaneously just to crawl over and grab a toy cannot be just summarized by a few electric impulses through the nervous system to the cells. There's a whole bunch of other things that have to simultaneously start. And that kind of global thinking is can be reached once you are in tune with that kind of higher intuition, and especially where you receive the information from. And so now you might object that, okay, wow, this is so scary. It's like I'm receiving orders from this scary AI singularity that is dictating every single one of my actions. But it's not actually so. It's more like this balance between free will and intuition that you receive, that you should follow, because actually it is in your best interest. It is in the best interest of each of your cells to do what you actually want to do as a person. They trust you. They trust your judgment. Like, your cells would not survive very long if they didn't obey you when you wanted to move out of the way of an obstacle or flee from a predator. So they trust that whatever you want to do is in their best interest. And so it's as if during the day you had like time out or free time where you could do whatever the hell you want. But sometimes during the day, you really receive this information that takes the form of intuition, of a gut feeling or whatever, that you should be doing this. You should say this to a person, or you should, I don't know. And one of my psychologists told a story that really exemplifies this. It's this person that was at the shopping mall, and they were really very connected to the higher self, and suddenly they received this injunction to do a cartwheel in the middle of the shop. And they're like, well, that's nonsense. Why would I do that? And then they receive that injunction again, like, do a cartwheel. And then so they do it for seemingly no reason. And then there's this person that rushes up to them and says, hugs them and is in tears and says, "Thank you so much. I was feeling suicidal. And I was saying with my art, like my, no, right now, oh, I'm cracking up now. I'm crying. I was praying to God as a desperate last attempt to say, if you exist, then make someone in the store do a cartwheel." And so the person did it. And doing this that seemed completely ridiculous saved a person's life because they followed through on intuition, or this higher form of intuition. So I hope this was interesting to you, and looking forward to talk to you in the next video. Thanks.